It's almost like, sounds so terrible to say, or so like highbrow. I want to transcend the magic origin story because I've been doing that for 4 or 5 years. And I just want to talk more about where they're at now and how magic is a part of their daily life.
Hello and welcome to episode number 86 of the Hobbies and Happiness podcast, where we talk all about the hobby that makes us happy, tabletop gaming. I'm one of your hosts, Dan.
And I'm Jim. And today we're talking with the human of magic, James Hsu.
I was wondering where you were going with that. As he says, human of magic, I'm like, that's not it. That's not the thing. But I'm like, oh, okay, no, it makes sense. He is a human of magic.
A human of magic.
All right, well, before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsor real quick, Amazon Audible. If you head over to our affiliate link, www.audibletrial.com/hobbies and happiness, you can sign up for your free 30-day trial of Amazon's Audible service. What's Amazon Audible, you ask? It's Amazon's audiobook service. Well, if you follow that link, you can sign up. You get a free audiobook added to your account. That's right, a free audiobook of any book that's on the service added directly to your account. What's even better, if you're an Amazon Prime member, you get two free books added to your account. And if you don't like the service, you can cancel before the end of that 30 days. Get to keep those books on your account. Do yourself a favor, head over to our affiliate link, sign up, get your free books right now added to your account. And that way you can just get a free audiobook and listen to that book on your commute. So again, head over to that affiliate link, audibletrial.com/hobbies and happiness. All right. Today, this was an episode, guys. I'm gonna warn you now. This episode is very different from all of our other episodes.
Yes.
Very, very different. So James is a fellow content creator, a fellow interviewer. If you've never checked out his stuff, head over to Humans of Magic, and he interviews a lot of people inside the Magic the Gathering community, and honestly just gets to know them and just has great conversations. So go check out all of his stuff, okay? He has conversations about magic without having a conversation about magic, right? It's all about the people behind the game Magic the Gathering, and not even necessarily the people behind the game, but just anybody who's involved with the game.
Any humans in magic.
If you're a human and you play Magic on some sort of level, he may want to have a conversation with you.
Potentially.
So, we talked about a lot of different stuff today. And honestly, this is probably one of the best conversations that we've had. I
personally wasn't ready for where this was going.
Neither was I. I was not ready either. And you know what? Let's just get right into it.
Enjoy.
Right, here you go. All right, joining us today on the podcast is James Hsu of Humans of Magic. James is an entrepreneur, author, and like we said, host of the podcast, Humans of Magic. James, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, before we get into it, if you could you tell us and our audience kind of a little bit about you, your backstory, specifically kind of in the tabletop and magic space, since, a lot of your content here is specifically focused kind of on magic, and then kind of what Humans of Magic, that podcast, is all about for our audience who is unfamiliar.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm a Magic player. I grew up in Canada, now live in mainland China. I work in tech. I've been an entrepreneur for the last couple of years. I built a magic-related startup a few years back called Cardboard Live, and I've been doing Humans of Magic as just a fun hobby project. And just, I guess that's a little bit about myself. I decided to get a little bit more serious about Humans of Magic about a year ago, and that's where I am now.
Awesome. So kind of before we even talk about Humans of Magic, guys, if you guys are listening, I really encourage you, go check out the Humans of Magic Twitter. James has a lot of really great tweet threads on kind of all the stuff that he's learned in doing that podcast, interviewing. There's kind of one in particular, and I'm going to make sure that we kind of link this tweet thread in the description here. But since you've started doing this podcast, right? One thing that you mentioned here, your mentality, I just want to have a good convo and learn from others. Has that shifted or changed at all since you started doing Humans of Magic?
Yeah, I would say that having a good convo is where I'm at now. And it definitely wasn't where I was when I started a few years back. A few years
Mm-hmm.
back, Humans of Magic, the way I started it was just like, hey, I want to check off my bucket list. I want to be able to have interesting conversations or just be able to talk to people, certain people, period, in the magic community. There's a lot of people in the community that I admire, I look up to, or I just want to learn more about them in some way. And that's kind of how I started. So when I started a few years back, it was a lot more mechanical. I was very much like, okay, I have 10 questions,
Yeah.
15 questions. Let's just go through them, and over time, I actually realized by studying myself and also studying other people who do it that that's not really the way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's not the best way to actually unlock getting people to tell you stuff, honestly. So,
Mm-hmm.
if it's very much by the book and here's 10 questions, it's I just really felt like when I said wanted to get a little bit more serious about a year ago, I wanted to really challenge myself to see how can I actually unlock more of people's mindset and their backgrounds and all of that stuff. And so it's been kind of an evolution. And the way I do things
Mm-hmm.
is I always want to challenge myself or try to do things slightly differently the next time around so that
Mm-hmm.
it's more enjoyable. So that's kind of where I'm
Mm-hmm.
at right now.
All right. So I was talking to Jim offline here a little bit, and I was like, this is gonna. I'm really excited for this talk and this conversation because I feel like what you're doing with Humans of Magic is super similar to kind of what we're doing on our podcast, right? And I've been saying for months, I'm like, we just want to have good conversations and learn from all these people who've been in the space and honestly just gush and have a lot of fun in this space that we all find ourselves, right? And so like I've just been excited for this conversation, really just to talk to kind of a peer, right? Somebody who's doing something very similar. So I got to ask you, interviewer to interviewer, okay? What's your biggest piece of advice, huh? On getting these quality conversations from these really awesome people.
Oh man, putting me on the spot. I'm usually on the other side, but
Yeah, right.
I would say the number one advice I would have for anybody, whether you're just getting started right now, literally recording your first podcast, or it's been a few tens or hundreds of episodes, is just give the guest room to say what they want to say. Just try to listen more and interject less. And it's easier said than done because I am still often guilty of this quite a bit. Like there's some stuff that I listen back to, even recent episodes, and I'm just like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, right? I think it's also okay. Maybe the more advanced answer is like you have to also tailor it to where the conversation's going and the personality and style of the guest. But generally speaking, I would say just try to let the silence do the work and try to let the guests give them a chance to express themselves instead of making it about you basically.
Mhm. Yeah, you wrote about that. I think you tweeted about that a little bit in that thread that I mentioned earlier, guys. So you go check it out. And as I'm going through all this, I'm like, man, this is actually some really good advice. Because I mean, for me personally, I've been, I do a lot of editing for our episodes, and there's just been I'm like, Dan, why did you just stop talking and let them talk, man? I do have a bad habit of kind of interjecting, and that's something that I know Jim and we've actually talked about a little bit is like I know for me personally, I've just been trying to learn to, talk less, listen more, talk less, and let the guest speak. So 100%. Um,
Real
so
quick, I just wanted to throw in.
yes,
So
Jim.
Dan had, like he was just saying, has a problem of maybe stepping in a little too much. I have the problem of sitting really far back and just letting everyone else, talk, do their thing, and so for me, I need to actually start talking more and putting in a little bit because there was a few times when we were doing a podcast, and I was like, I wonder if I could sit here and say absolutely nothing while Dan just talks to this other person. And but I was just like, all right, I can't do that. I'm not even going to test those waters. And Dan, there have been times at the start, Dan was like, hey, yeah, I'm going to need you to just like tell me to shut up sometimes and you just start talking. If you
He's not
start to
wrong.
interrupt me, I will just stop talking. So, and ever since then, I'm like, okay, good idea. I'm going to have to start doing that.
Well, I would say that you guys have a good thing down, right? Just from watching a couple of your episodes together. And I would say that, what I'm doing is one-on-one. You guys are doing two-on-one or something to that effect. You guys
Mhm.
are an order of magnitude harder because it's not only about the one-on-one thing, but it's the interplay between the two hosts, and that is so difficult. So I think in a way it's actually good that you guys are opposites, because if both people are super talkative, both people are like Jim, then
Mm-hmm.
that's actually arguably harder, you know? So
Jim, can you imagine?
if there are two
we
Jims,
would just sit
right?
here.
Just
It would just be
like
like,
the guest
no,
monologue. That's cool too. Yeah.
tell us about yourself.
That's literally what it would be like.
Yeah.
And
There's
then
a time
like
and
I
place
look
for
at the
both.
other
You
person.
need both, right? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
do you want to
yeah.
add anything? No. Okay. All right.
All right. So James, one thing that I've kind of been asking this question a lot, but kind of what made you want to talk to all these people? What made Humans of Magic a passion project for you?
I think in the beginning, okay, this is kind of a long story. So I do play quite a lot of Magic, at least in the past. And I actually wrote a book and a series of blogs that became a book about my experiences playing Magic. And I did that for a little bit of time. And after I wrote that book, and it was all about myself, because I'm egotistical, I want to write about myself and my challenges. And I mean, I thought I could help people by writing the book because there's some generalizable things, but mostly it was writing about myself. I mean, in reality.
Mhm.
And then basically a friend of mine, Julian, a really good friend of mine, just said, "Hey, what's going to be your next project?" He asked me, and I just decided I was just so sick and tired of writing about myself, or I wanted to turn the attention on other people.
Mhm.
And that's basically how Humans of Magic started. It was part bucket list. As I said, I wanted to really talk to people in the community whom I really admire, but
Mhm.
also just wanting to tell other people's stories. And I've always been a fan of that, right? As a
Mhm.
consumer of content. And I just felt like it was a little bit underexplored in the Magic community, where Magic community is really a lot about gameplay. And
Mhm.
a few years back, it was really more about competitive strategy. Now it's a little bit different, but
Mhm.
it's still mostly about the game itself. And I kind of
Right.
wanted to see if I could do things my way, essentially.
So my next question, I don't know if you can dive into that a little bit more, but I was going to ask, like, why Magic? Like, why choose the topic of Magic the Gathering as a catalyst for these conversations? Was it more so like you just talked about, there not being enough of that in the space, and it just be too heavily focused on strategy and gameplay, and we didn't really see anything else in that topic, or was there maybe a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely that's part of it. The other part is just I've been in the Magic community, and so I had some connections to some of these players and personalities, so it was easier uh, to get up and running that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that people would be interested in listening to the personal side of things. Now, having said all that, I have thought really hard especially over the past year, of thinking, you know, could I branch out from here, right? Could I interview more people from all walks of life, not just people that happen to play Magic? Because where the show is at right now, it's the most magic podcast there is. That's almost like the
Yeah.
unofficial title of
Yeah.
Humans of Magic.
Yeah.
It's just I always tell my guests, like, if we have a recording and we talk about Magic most of the time, this recording will be an abject failure. Like
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to just be all about Magic. Like there's other podcasts, there's other channels, there's articles, there's lots of things for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about expressing your personal side, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I had an episode recently with Jesse Robkin that I was incredibly proud with. proud of, because we did not talk about magic. We talked about her transition, right? Gender
Mhm.
transition. We talked about the short film that she was making. We talked about just everything but magic, like basically her passion as a storyteller, as a playwright, and now as a filmmaker. Like magic is really just the excuse to get in the door. But I really
Right.
believe that, and this is very counterintuitive to what we're kind of trained to do as content creators, right? Kind of as content creators, we're kind of taught that you should do one thing. You
Yeah.
should have one go to, right? Maybe it's the Disney card game. Maybe it's maybe it's something else, right? But you're supposed to have like one gear, right?
Right.
You should be known as the X,
Yeah.
the person for X, whatever that is.
Hmm.
And I'm just not about that. I've just decided I'd rather grow much more slowly, doing these interviews that I actually enjoy.
Hmm.
And honestly, they're a little bit more meandering, because we're not just like here to play Commander. We're not here to just talk about one thing.
Right.
But I've decided, I've sort of made peace with, that's how I want to do it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm. Yeah, it's just it's like you said, magic is like that foot in the door. It is that reason why I'm starting this conversation with you, but the conversation I want to have is not about magic. It's just more about you and learning more about you. Like we talked about, I think we talked a little bit about before the call, right? Is it's about that connection, right? And it's really the gathering side, right? It's called Magic the Gathering, and I feel like a lot of the content, a lot of content specifically in the space is really geared toward Magic. Rightfully so, right? Like it's the game. But I
yep.
honestly really wonder if the name Magic the Gathering, right? If that the gathering side was added because of that social benefit, right? It's something I would love to talk to Richard Garfield and all those who were in that room at the beginning and figure out what was the reason we're going to call it Magic the Gathering, right? But like the gathering side has been huge. Like it's been talked about so much within the past couple of years, and like I like that because like we're all about tabletop, and the reason we've said this so many times, the reason we love getting around this table isn't to play a game. Like, yes, that's why we kind of do it, but it's the connections that we're making across the table from one another and these bonds and these relationships that we continue to form. That I think is what is going to be like at the highest. That's what the priority is, right? Now, speaking of that, let's talk about magic.
On that
Let's do
note,
it.
Yeah, on that note, now how because you've talked about you've played Magic for a while, right? But how or why did you start playing Magic?
I started in third edition
Okay.
revised with
Wow.
my brother. We found the two-player set. I guess this was like mid-90s. We found that, got our parents to buy it for us, and that's how we started.
Mm-hmm.
My brother and I just played super casually. We didn't go to F&Ms or whatever it was called at the time. We just played at home. We played for Annie, like if
oh
anyone
man,
remembers that.
oh
I just
yeah,
listened back to what was the ABU the receivables where they talked about Annie, and it just brought a lot of memories back.
Uh-huh.
So my brother and I used to play, win each other's cards back and forth.
Okay.
Um, that's kind of how I started. My brother drifted out of the game eventually, as did I.
Mm-hmm.
I basically went to college. This was back in Canada, and just stopped Magic because I just thought Magic was not a cool thing, and other priorities, didn't have that much disposable income,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think I stopped buying packs and playing Magic. It was around, I want to say, like Mirage or Visions,
Okay.
sometime around there.
Uh-huh.
And then a long time passes, and then I come back in, I think, 2007 or 2008, and that's when I actually found competitive Magic, and I've been playing Magic since then.
Okay. Now for for all of our guests who have some experience with Magic as a game, there's a question that Jim likes to throw at everybody, and apparently, according to Jim, there's a right answer. So, Jim, go ahead, take it away.
There's a right answer. All right, all right. It was just a really good answer that we got. Okay, it was just the correct one at the time. So, all right, depending on your answer to this question, okay, it's going to set the tone for the rest of the conversation. For you,
In Jim's mind,
as a Magic player, what is your favorite either single color or color combination to play?
Oh, there's no doubt it's black for me. I'm a
Okay.
black mage
Okay.
through and through.
Nice.
Now, why is that? That's a great answer. I love black, but I'm curious as to why. Because you were like right there. You were like right on it. There's got to be a reason.
I think that's just the color I gravitated to when I first started playing in the 90s. I really love the Sengir Vampire, Drudge Skeletons, Will-o'-the-Wisp. I really love some of those classic spells. Unholy Strength with the pentagram still on it, I guess. So
Oh man.
I just really love the whole idea of and one of my favorite cards is Dark Confidant, because greatness at any cost, right? Black in Magic is all about sacrificing the long term for the short term. It's really about corrupting yourself to reach that next level. And I always loved decks like Suicide Black, and just like, it's fine if I go down to 5 life, because because back then my overpowered creature that was like 1 mana for a 2/2 like deal 1 damage to me on my upkeep, but I would kill you faster. So I just really love that kind of sacrifice for, I mean, Demonic Tutor, like lots of staple cards, right? Demonic Consultation. Like, I just love that idea of like, you're just like killing yourself for power, right? And that's definitely not how I am in real life, but it's just something about that fantasy aspect of it, right?
Sure.
I'm definitely not a burn all my bridges in real life person, but I just really love that flavor of like being a black or mono black mage. So
Okay.
Very cool. Life's a resource until it hits 0. Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was actually funny. I was playing Arena the other day. Actually, I think this was on stream last night, actually. Maybe not. I can't remember. But I was down to 3 life, and there was no way I was going to win. There's no way I was going to win. And I tutored up. I was trying to find an answer. So I had Grim Tutor at 3 life. And so I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go out the way I want to go out. And so I cast Grim Tutor, found the answer. I found my board wipe, but then I died because I had to pay the 3 life. So that's always fun.
Yeah. If I can't win, you can't. I mean, if I mean, that's the best way to go out.
I can't
right?
win.
If I
You're
can't
not
win,
going
you
to
can't
kill
win
me.
either.
Yep. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of killing me. I'm going to kill myself. So, all right. So back to Humans of Magic. Okay. Ever since I found out about the project, my mind immediately went to Humans of New York. Okay. For those of you who aren't familiar, Humans of New York is a photo project by Brandon Stanton. Started out just taking pictures of people on the streets of New York, post them to his blog. And I think I said it was back in 2010, and it is now, I think he's amassed like 17 million followers or something. It's turned into a massive success. And like the whole reason was he just wanted to highlight the people of the city of New York and tell their stories, because he didn't think they were being told. So, was Humans of New York an inspiration to Humans of Magic at all?
Oh, 100%. I totally ripped off the the name. I was a big fan of Humans in New York. I still read it from time to time. I think what he did was wonderful, right? And I wanted to try and take that kind of spirit or mindset into my own project. Funny story, when I started Humans of Magic, I didn't think I would get an answer at all, and I didn't. But I actually emailed Brandon Stanton to be like, hey, I'm going to start a new podcast called Humans of Magic. Is it okay? I guess he's a very busy guy, or he gets a million emails a day. He never got back to me, but I was kind of nice about it too. I was like, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't infringing on something. And I guess I wasn't. I mean, I'm not that big. So it's like, hopefully that's been okay. But definitely Humans in New York was an influence. I think it's been that is definitely something I want to do more, is more man on the street type of interactions.
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about whether I could do that. It's a little bit difficult, right? Because one, I'm in
Right.
China,
Yeah.
and two, like the last couple of years, even if I was not in China, it would have been a little harder to do all that if I were even in North America with COVID and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just something recently that reawakened it in me because um, I was in California. I was in LA in January for a couple weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually got to just hang out face to face with some of the creators whom I interviewed for Humans of Magic,
Mm-hmm.
and we had such a great time. Like for example, I was hanging out with Joe Johnson in
Mm-hmm.
LA and Black Needle,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up just like walking around, his favorite part of the town, favorite part of the city, and just having like a 3-4 hour conversation. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just thinking to myself, man, wouldn't it be great if like that was actually caught on camera or it was like actually recorded?
Mm-hmm.
Almost like that show like the Seinfeld one, uh comedians in cars getting coffee, but like
Yeah.
way more low budget when
Yeah.
without the cars and maybe just with the coffee. Um
We
I
were
would love to do something like that.
yeah.
That would be truer to like the Humans of New York ethos for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you do any sort of photography at all? Because again, like humans, again, for those that don't know, Humans of New York, real from my understanding, I'm pretty sure it started as a photography project. But I was
Yes.
just curious if you do any sort of photography.
I don't. So that's probably a gap I need to address. This probably explains also my terrible setup. I don't have a nice camera. I really need to get something here. I mean, uh, you know, um, yeah, I got to figure that out because, like, I think having a what do you call that? Like a cinematographer or like a
Mm-hmm.
a person, like either photographer or
Cinematographer person.
either photographer or camera person to help with some of that stuff would be absolutely huge.
Yeah, and the awesome thing about like this just technology, excuse me, in the year that we live, it's so easy for anybody to like learn a new skill, like even with photography or video. Um, and I always recommend everybody just start and then you're gonna learn because I'm sure by now you've probably learned a lot about editing, like audio, and then even a little bit about cameras too from all the time that you've just been doing these interviews, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Definitely better than where I was a year ago,
Yeah,
but I still have a long ways to go. So
sure.
here's the secret. Like I still am a terrible editor. I still use iMovie, right? Like I still have a very bare bones kind of setup. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I need to find time to upgrade my skill set for sure. But I guess where I'm at right now is that I'm just thinking. Actually, I you guys might be able to tell me the best way, but
Hmm.
I'm just thinking like, okay, I have limited time to do a show. So what are the things I need to maximize my time on? Like 80-20 rule, right? Like what's the 80%, 20% thing that will give me 80% of the results? And I think as long as audio quality is not terrible because it's 2023 and no one's going to listen to a podcast if the audio is terrible.
Hmm.
Um, that's just facts.
Hmm.
Um, but like some of the other things like, video on my side is not amazing or um, I'm not using the latest and greatest editing techniques. I don't have a super high fidelity setup. Those are
Hmm.
things that I'm going to slowly upgrade over time, but I
Hmm.
just don't think it should get in the way of actually just releasing something literally every
Right.
week. Because if I
Correct.
focus too much on the upgrades or like the technical stuff, then I get too lost in that without actually trying to improve or focusing my energy as to improve as an interviewer and improving the content itself.
Hmm.
Um, Now, having said that, I could be wrong because I think maybe what I'm saying about audio quality should also apply to everything else because it is also the year 2023 and maybe people have expectations for how the other things should be.
Hmm.
So I'm a little conflicted on that. And you know how it is. There's all these
Yep.
things that you could get better on. Like you can get
Yeah.
better at thumbnails, you can get better at
Yep.
editing,
Yep.
and I'm not great at any of them. But because the nature of the profession is like you have to be a generalist, so it's kind of hard to figure out like where do I try to level up.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing that I've learned, and I'm continuing to learn, but when I started doing content, and this was years ago, even on actually doing the Gathering Arena content, one thing that has stuck with me is just get 1% better. Like every new thing that you do, just get 1% better. Right? Don't focus, don't try to reinvent, don't try to do something a whole lot better. Just do one thing even a little bit better. And that honestly continues to serve me, because instead of, and we'll actually talk about this, because in one of your book recommendations, I was very interested in one of the things that you said. But if you just get too stuck in the rut of doing the same thing over and over, even if it's at a high quality, right, I don't think you're going to continue. I don't think you'll grow, right? Even if what you're doing, because I think at the end of the day, yes, we all want to put out quality content, right? But we also want to grow and get bigger. And that's just a human, I don't want to say need, but like that's part of one of the reasons I think a lot of people are doing content, right? Is to get more people to listen or watch their stuff. And I think the way you do that by growing is you grow yourself, right? And so by doing that, just get 1% better in a little thing. I mean, I've learned so much, even just by, hey, in this time for this podcast, I'm going to research something new, just even one technique that, okay. And it took me like a minute. And then, hey, I learned a new skill. Awesome. Perfect. And so the next time I learned something else new. And like, I've gotten a lot better just by doing 1% better in this, in whatever the next piece of content is. And I tell that to everybody. And I think that too. I learned that from Sean Cannell. He's an influencer in the space, but I think part one is just get out there and do it, kind of like you talked about. But then the next step is, how do you get better? Just get that little bit better every single time, and then you do that. You know, you start from way down here, and then by over time, you're just getting a little bit better. You know, you'll be surprised at how far you can go in even a short amount of time. So like with audio, go ahead, Jim.
Going off of what you said earlier, James, of if you just did your magic content, right, you could be higher up in terms of viewers, subs, whatever it is, but you're taking this more slow route climbing, because this is like exactly what you're looking to do and build it as. So you're already going for the long game, right? Mm-hmm. So this just over time, slowly getting better and better, like you're going to be compounding like crazy of, all right, not only am I doing the podcast how I want to, I'm now also just slowly getting better over time. And that you could even grow even further than what nothing but magic content could have you at potentially. Mm-hmm. So definitely don't be in a rush of, what's the one thing I have to concentrate on? Because also, like you were saying, you have to be pretty generalist in all of it. You have to know it all, but you don't have to know it all today.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I'm totally taking that to heart. And just having the awareness that things compound over time is super key, right? I mean, it's not just content, but it's investing, it's life, it's life in general. Mm-hmm. But I'll be honest, like I have anxiety, or I have my doubts about what I'm doing as well, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. Because I don't think for me doing traditional magic content is that sustainable. Like I would probably lose interest over time compared to what I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there is a part of me that's wondering, like, how, like, what's the audience for this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think
it's crazy.
That's why I say you guys have a good thing going on, because you're able to balance these kind of conversations with the more like the gameplay aspects of it. And I think Dan, you're right. It's not a human need, but it is a human want, right? Because I'm always thinking, like, if I'm doing it, I might as well try to get more mass appeal, and then that gets kind of tricky, right? Like, you know what I mean. Like, exactly. There's always this sort of tension.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like, again, this is one of the reasons why I love having these conversations with a fellow content creator, right? Because we get to have these conversations about, hey, we're both doing something similar. Hey, here's like this part of the conversation is we don't have a lot of these conversations on the podcast a lot, and like audience apologies if they're like, this isn't what I'm here for. But this, like,
Oh
this,
no, that's definitely not what they're here for. Not what they're here for. Like it's like I can tell you that because like every time I try to go meta on Humans of Magic and try to have these conversations that I really enjoy, we go into a super rabbit hole about
Mhm.
the nature of content and social
Sure.
media and etc. Those are my least popular episodes by a mile. So I have to ask myself like if it's just me and the guest and maybe three people that enjoy it, is it if a tree fell in the forest, is it still worth it to
Uh-huh.
do? And that's part of my self-doubt, right? It's like
Right.
I'm having a great time talking to you guys about this, and I can sense that you guys love talking about it too. But where's the mass appeal, right? This
Mhm.
is kind of like the example in a microcosm.
Mhm.
So
Well, I want to take this opportunity to kind of give you kind of a little bit behind the curtain and as to why we are here and what we are doing and our goal and our purpose. Because in my view, and Jim, I know Jim's right here as well. Okay, have you ever read the book of Find Your Why by Simon Sinek?
I have heard his TED talk.
Okay.
I have not read the book, but I assume that the book is based on the main concepts in the talk, right?
Yeah,
Dude's
yeah,
great. Dude is
it's
phenomenal.
it's fantastic. I highly recommend it. And that this is a book I recommend to pretty much anybody in content, tech, any sort of leadership position. It's applicable to so many different aspects of our lives. And so I would highly recommend picking up, giving it a read. But essentially, like you talked about, right? Listen to his TED talk. If I think it's very important to keep your why at the forefront of everything you're doing. Okay. And then in doing that, that is like Jim talked about, that is playing the long game, right? That is that have that as your backing for every choice that you make. You're not making these choices based off of, all right, this is going to gain me more money in the short term. But as long as you have that backing, everything that you're doing, I think you're going to find more long-term success and the success that you are specifically looking for, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about, we want to be fulfilled, right? And we want to help others in that fulfillment, find that fulfillment through what we're doing as well, right? And so for us, the whole reason we started doing Hobbies and Happiness, okay, was we came together, we met at our LGS. That LGS closed in 2020, okay? Not during COVID, but however, it closed not because of COVID, but that was just an opportunity for them to close because the owner was looking to get out. Jim actually worked there. So after about a year, Jim, it was about a year, right? Give or take?
A little bit less than a year.
Okay. So I called Jim up and said, we got to do something, because the community that was formed, that we were a part of at that store, was huge for the both of us and for that community there. And there are other local game stores in our area where we could not find communities like the ones that we had at Grapple Games. And I know for a lot of people there, they were just very disheartened that that store closed. So we were like, we have got to do something. We have to keep this community going. And more so, not just let's take the community and go to another store. That wasn't it, because those stores were not helping foster and grow that community that we helped. I don't want to say create, but at least sustain while we were there. So that's why we came together, and
we definitely created that. Oh yeah.
Well,
Oh,
I'm removing myself.
So I remember how the store was before, like, that community really started to come into play. And I heard stories from before I was even really a part of being in the community there. And it was pretty much 180-degree turn. It was a lot of toxicity, a lot of bad people there.
It was a lot of the negatives that you hear in a lot of gaming communities.
Yeah. And I have a bunch of people that would 100% back me up on those statements of it wasn't a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't want to say, right, like when they hired a specific person, it really started to change. Or maybe like when that specific person was, putting himself at that store like 5 days a week. probably me. I don't know exactly. Uh, the store started to make a shift and started to flourish in the community aspect. But I'm not going to point any fingers. I'll just say he's got two thumbs and wearing a gray shirt. It's this. Okay, it's this guy.
Now, but that was still before me. So like I didn't have much hand in making that community good. Like that was a lot of Jim, right? And so when it closed, like so a lot of people just took it hard, right? And then I saw what like Jim started building, and like we continued to foster it, and it was good. We had a lot of great conversations. I remember multiple conversations that I've had with other people, like politics, religion, the stuff that you don't talk about, the stuff that's taboo, like where I disagreed, but we had really good conversations, and it helped my relationships with those people get so much deeper, and like I learned more about them. And like there was just this sense of openness and real community that we had there. And so when that store closed, we're like, dude, we got to do this. And so the reason we started was we wanted to open up our own LGS. And so I thought, okay, well, we don't have the money to where we can just open an LGS right now. So what do we do? So we started a podcast, and then we started a YouTube channel. So like, okay, well, let's start making content, and then let's start, just trying to raise money. And then hopefully one day we can open up our own LGS in our community where we can continue and grow what was started at Grapple Games. So that was our why. And everything that we're doing, we keep that at the forefront. We keep that reminder, and that helps influence each of our decisions for what we do at Hobbies and Happiness. And so, like, for us, that's our why. And so, like, and that's why I like the Simon's book, Find Your Why, because I think that's just applicable to kind of everything, right? So that's our why.
Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome. I think that's such a good reminder. I feel like everyone intuitively understands you need to know why you're doing things, but it's so easy in life to just sleepwalk through it.
Yep.
So I love that you guys have that intentionality about it. And the other thing, I just want to say one other thing as well. Like, I know it's not popular to talk about, spirituality or like religion or like church and things like that. But I think it is important to have a spiritual reason to do things, right? Like I feel like I do have a vibe that there's something that you guys are trying to achieve there as well. Or maybe just Dan, I don't know. Like, like I feel like there like that is really important too, is like, cause I feel like in 2020, in the 21st century, like it's not the church anymore, but it's community. So, we can all have fun or gather around like certain hobbies and things. And that's really important for human connection and bonding. And I think that being a part of the why is absolutely huge, right? I'm not the person on the pulpit saying like, yeah, you should be more spiritual and things like that. But it's like, I also think it's kind of just hard these days for, all right, there's going to be a huge stereotype here, but I think it's hard for men to like connect over things other than just like watch sports and drink beer. And like, if there's any way that people can connect through other things and have good conversations and have fun playing games and things like that, I think that's a huge net positive. So it's like, I feel like what you guys are doing is important for your community, and I hope you can keep it up and keep up the why, as it were.
Yeah, and kind of continuing this a little bit, like for me personally, I mean, I'm a Christian, and we actually host in my house. We have our small group at our church. We host it. So every Tuesday night, Jim's been here. We have everybody down in our basement, and we meet for like an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, just hanging out and continuing to learn from the scriptures. And since we started going to that church, it's just been, I know for my family, it's been phenomenal. I mean, Jim has been to church with me quite a few times, and like my faith is not something that I shy away from. It definitely informs everything that I do. But again, it really, as I get older, I learn more and more, and it continues to reinforce the idea that all of life, as we go through life, everything is about relationships and fostering and developing and nurturing good relationships. And regardless of what it is, like, it doesn't even matter what the topic is. Like, even in tabletop gaming, it's all about relationships. And whether or not you disagree with somebody, that doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't, because you want to nurture that relationship. And so, like, again, like you said, it's just finding that why, and that just it influences pretty much all the decisions that I make. And like I said, just continuing to find that why. But I'm gonna stop because I keep going and going. Jim, jump in. Come on.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I think going off of when you were talking about how a lot of guys have it difficult trying to like find groups of people other than drinking beer and watching football. I do think it's gotten a lot easier. And like, as soon as you brought it up, I instantly thought of older generations. But now it's like the people that are growing up and roughly my generation, some a little bit older than me, having online video games or which I guess pretty much gaming community, internet stuff, has really brought people more connected. And, just going off of the football and beer as more of an older thing that's slowly getting erased as a stereotype.
Right.
And going more into the future, it's not much of an issue.
Yeah, that is super true. Yeah, that is
internet brings everyone together.
There's more and more ways
but it also separates us.
Yeah. Yeah, James. Since we're talking about this whole connection thing, I was reading through kind of your blog and your website, and then you've got this one post in particular which you talked a lot about Twitter. I think this was like June of last year, right? Twitter has been known for being a dumpster fire. It's been
cesspool,
coined.
I call it. Yes.
Yeah, it's cesspool. One of the things that you say in here is like Twitter's a waste of time. Twitter's not real. But one thing that you say in there is yes,
it's one of my favorite sayings. I love telling that to people. Twitter's not real.
Yeah.
But James, one thing you say is you said there's nothing wrong with Twitter. There's everything wrong with how we use Twitter. And then you go on to basically talk all about connection and using Twitter to develop meaningful connections. And one of the things you say in there, and I can attest that James actually does this, okay? But when you get a new follower, you DM them, tell them a little bit about yourself, and start having an actual connection and conversation with them. So I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about kind of your philosophy with Twitter and kind of what you see there.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So it's really not about Twitter, but more about social platforms in general.
Sure.
Like I've had a lot of learnings over the years, especially recent years, where I kind of realized that the nature of online conversation is just that people don't really want to be fully honest in a public space. I actually think podcasts are kind of an exception, which is also why I love doing podcasts, because I feel like people are actually as close to their honest selves, 1 hour into a conversation as they can be, right? But I just mean, like, in terms of typing something on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, I think there's such a divide between what you say out in public when you know other people are going to read it or react to it versus what you say in private, which is why I love DMs and Twitter, because I feel like that's where I actually get the most meaningful feedback. Like no one ever, like, very rarely do people tweet like an open thing that says, I love Humans of Magic or I hate Humans of Magic, but I want those constructive pieces of feedback. And so the way I get it is I message people privately in DMs and I just say, hey, I'm doing this thing. Thanks for following me. I love to get your feedback on it. And I get the best feedback that way because people, whether they're not comfortable or they're not public or whatever, they don't want to say these things out in public. But a lot of the time it's just my philosophy. Like if you just ask sometimes, like people will take the time to tell you. And when I say the learnings I had over the past couple of years, it's kind of developing this philosophy, if you will, but also the fact that also the fact that just recognizing that people don't want to admit that they're wrong ever in the
Yeah.
nature of the internet. Like, I don't think in the history of the internet
Yeah.
anyone has ever said like, "Yeah, you've changed my mind. I admit now that I was wrong because I had this take an hour ago, and now I read all the evidence, and now I'm
Definitely
totally
not Crowder.
I willingly admit that James was wrong."
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen. So it's
Yeah.
like it's just social platforms feed our impulses in the best and worst ways. So
Mhm.
we have to think of these things as tools and not just be like resigned to like, oh, I hate Twitter. I don't ever want to use it. I think there's ways to use it, especially as a creator, that can help you achieve your goals and your why, but you just have to be more intentional with it. So
Mhm. Yeah, I had an interaction on Twitter a few years back with a creator, um, and it's turned into where Twitter, everybody posts about everything, which more power to you, right? But I was having a conversation, and I can't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I had said something basically that I disagreed with whatever the topic was. I got blocked because I said I disagreed. I can't even remember exactly what I said, but for me, whenever I have conversations on the internet, I stay away from like being outraged. I am very careful with my words because again, I want to. In texting is so difficult because you can convey very little. All you read are words, and those words can be interpreted. There's no inflection. There's no voice, right? So if you said even just two words, right, I could read into that and take it a completely different way than it was intended. So whenever I'm having any sort of conversation on any social media platform, which is why I try to have those less and as less as I can because they're typically not productive, right?
yeah.
That now I've learned. I was very careful with my words, got blocked, but then I DM'd this person and tried to convey here's what my point was and here's where where I was coming from. They ended up unblocking me and then saying I'm going to unblock here and here's why I think they're wrong, which is fine. Like I like having the conversation, but you got to be intentional, and it's just texting, having any sort of text conversation in public is very different than having those private conversations from what I've seen, and it tends to be those private conversations are just much more fruitful, for lack of a better word. Like really helps to develop that connection kind of a little bit more. I mean, it seems like that's kind of. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. And even in like small Facebook group chats I have with friends, I'm a lot more careful these days. Like, just because I ran into this stuff a few years back too. It's just like, I have what I think are like fairly well educated friends and people around me, and a lot of the conversations still devolve into places that I don't want it to go, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if it's a small group chat with like 5 or 10 people,
Mm-hmm.
and then I just kind of realized, I think it's just so difficult. And I think having this is kind of a side agenda of Humans of Magic, because like I'll have people, I've brought on people on the show that they might tweet something that catches my eye, and I'm kind of wondering what's going on and things like that, and I just want to develop these fuller length conversations, right? Because it's not
Mm-hmm.
just for other people, it's for me as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I guess we can talk about that in a bit when we talk about maybe like bucket list or future guests. But it's like, I just feel like, again, I feel like there's so much more to people than just like the fact that they play Magic, or the fact
Mm-hmm.
that they tweeted something controversial or something nice or something not nice. There's always something going on beyond that, and I always
Mm-hmm.
want to get to their why, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I always try to do whenever I'm having any sort of conversation with somebody, or even like a debate or an argument, is to understand the other person, understand their position. And I'll tell you, this happens a lot with my wife. Okay. I've learned in my marriage that yes, I can have a certain viewpoint. I can have a position. I can have the way that I'm feeling. Okay. But it's very important to my wife and to me that, that my wife knows that I love her. Right. that she knows that I understand her. And so I have to get outside of myself. I really have to take myself outside of me and forget how I feel, forget how I am being treated in a situation. And that's hard. That's difficult as human beings, right?
Mhm.
But once I really figured out and learned that, no, honey, this is not the way that you're taking that. That's not how I'm intended. That's not how I'm intending you to take it. Really doesn't matter. Like, it matters to an extent, right? But
Mhm.
like, if I love my wife and like I want to understand her, I need to understand how what I am doing does affect her. That's
Yes.
hard. That's difficult as human beings, right? But I'm learning that, and then I'm like, well, this really does apply to really all relationships, and that's understanding all these people around me.
Right.
And so
Right.
once I've really learned that and just being like, okay, let me think for a second outside of myself. Let me put myself in your shoes and then just try to
Mhm.
understand how you're feeling in a situation, or just kind of get a better sense of you, really helps. And I try to tell that to everybody, but it is hard. It is hard to do. 100%.
Oh, 200% what you just said. Like I have those challenges with my relationship, with my marriage, and with my family. And I'll be honest, I think the fact that I got a little bit better, I'm not saying I'm a pro at it, and nobody is.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not. But
1%
the
every
fact that I
day.
got a little bit better, just get 1% better, right? That has helped me in Humans of Magic. Like,
Yeah.
just being like a
Yeah.
better human being in actual everyday life, like
Yeah.
away from this recording, right? That
Yeah.
has helped a lot.
Mhm.
And there's also something I've really started to develop, because I've always prided myself on having good self-awareness, but there's a difference between good internal self-awareness and external self-awareness, right? So
Mhm.
internal self-awareness is like, I know why I'm thinking these things, or I know myself, but it's just as important to know how other people perceive you, just
Yeah.
as much as how you perceive yourself. So like, I can rationalize all the things in the world about to my wife about I did this because like this is my intention, but if she still doesn't feel great about whatever it is, then ultimately all the internal self-awareness I have about myself and my rationalizations, they don't really matter, right? Because that's what
Mhm.
communication is. It's about making someone else like feel um feel the proper way. And if
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
haven't done that, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Like, you could be the smartest person in the world, but you could still fail on that front. So I
Mhm.
agree with you 200% on that.
Mhm.
So
I
Yeah.
have a story to add here. So recently, I grouped up with my family, my brother, sister, my dad, and we started playing this game where it's called Stir the Pot. And these cards have different subjects on it. It could be like, oh, who's the most likely to go viral online, or this one very key card. It was, who is the least self aware, and my dad was the judge, and he was the one giving out the card. I think it was him. I don't remember exactly. But his vote was, he said he would give me the card. And to me, I'm like, you have to be kidding me. I'm like, I know my siblings, I know myself. And so I just like kind of I took it to heart, right? It's not like I was mad at the moment. I was just
Right.
confused. I'm like, why does he think this? And later that night, I was talking to my sister. We stood in the kitchen for about an hour, and I was just talking about it. And it came to the conclusion that, yeah, like you were saying, that internal self-awareness and versus like what other people perceive you as. And it was, I came to the conclusion that I just wasn't having this one-on-one time with my family. They don't really know me as a person. I tend to keep to myself. And this, no matter how much thinking I can do about myself and the world around me, that's not what I'm showing people. And I then later had the conversation with my dad, and he was like super happy that I even said anything. So it's the fact that all of this is just coming together is kind of nuts to me. So yeah,
And isn't it crazy, Jim, that all came out because you guys are playing a game?
exactly.
But like, that's a perfect story. Like 100%. That's a perfect story, right? With like tabletop, and why, like, a big part of why we're doing what we're doing is the relationships, right? Developing and nurturing those relationships around a table. It's kind of crazy, really. So, now, James, I'm really curious here. Okay. Sidebar. Personally, I love how we're like an hour into this and we kind of went through that. Like, that's to me, this is the most different type of conversation we've ever had on our podcast, and it's like, just, it's awesome.
I want to throw something before you continue. Okay.
Yeah.
Semi recently, I was talking to Dan and I brought up how, we've been doing a lot about talking about hobbies, what makes us happy. And I brought up the idea. I'm like, okay, but what if we tapped more into the mental health part of it? Like, what makes you happy? Like, what could make you more happy in life? Steps that you can take in life, and talking about certain things, or maybe it's physical aspects you can change in your life. And the fact that we're in this conversation right now and we're talking about things that you can change in your life, it's the happiness side of the hobbies and happiness, to where we were all pretty much on the one side. And so now that, again, I throw this out into the universe 2 weeks ago, last week, whatever it was. And of course, the guy with the same name as me, right? Same name. Of course it happens now.
Yeah, it's the universe coming together. And I interviewed a Jimmy yesterday, and
Nice.
we were talking about some similar things too. So I think it's
Wow.
just it's been circulating in my mind.
Yeah. That's really cool. I love, James, like how you've had all these conversations with people for us who have meant a lot to us particularly in the magic space, who we look up to, right? I watched that episode that you did with Josh Lee Kwai. Like, Jimmy and Josh both have just been, for us, huge inspirations for our content and kind of what we aspire to. There's just been so many. I'm just like, man, I would love to talk to all these people. And this is like, this year we've been able to start having these conversations, right? And like, it's so awesome for me. Like, with you now, with we talked with Jake Boss, we've talked with a lot of people, and we're like, we're not stopping, because we just.
I love the Jake Boss episode, by the way. That was great.
But I did want to ask, I'm really curious, in all the conversations that you've had, right? We talk about magic being the catalyst, right? Has there been an overarching theme with everyone that you talk to, as to like why maybe a lot of them got into magic, or maybe what keeps them into magic, right? Because again, we're all playing this game, right? I'm kind of curious. I'm very curious as to, I know why I started playing, I know why Jim started playing, but I'm really curious if that's kind of a universal thing, or if my assumption is everybody's story is different, but I'm kind of curious if there's like a common thread that maybe you've noticed in talking to all these different people.
Yeah, I there isn't one, but there's just a couple key ones, right? I think one of them is just mm, being exposed to magic at such a young age because of just influences around them. And it's just become part of their identity, for better or worse. So we definitely explore some of those in the conversations as well. Is it, basically, I like to call that the opportunity cost of magic, right? Because what does it mean when you get too into something and it's a part of your life identity? What does it actually mean? Is it healthy, unhealthy? Are you channeling it in certain ways? So that's definitely one category. I think the other category is just, it's interesting because I used to ask people a lot more about, like, tell me your magic origin story and why you got into it. But I think it was this year or recently that I started shifting away from that. Part of that is like wanting to challenge myself to do something differently. But also, it's just like, I think it was the pregame conversation I had with Josh Lee Quiet. He's like, James, you could ask me anything, but don't ask me about how I got into magic. That's such a boring story and nobody wants to hear it. And so I kind of took that to heart, because now I'm trying to do it the hard way, where it's like if the guests want to talk about their formative years with Magic, I'll let them do it for sure. But
Mm-hmm.
I never try to start from that, because I want to focus more on where they are at now, right? Which is why I love the fact that some of my recent episodes we don't talk about Magic at all, because and if Magic kind of goes in there organically, which it has in a lot of the conversations where people are comparing Magic to another discipline,
Mm-hmm.
like that's my sweet spot. That's what I'm happy with. It's not so much like, it's almost like, it sounds so terrible to say, or so like highbrow, but like I want to transcend like the Magic origin story, because I've been doing that for 4 or 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I just want to talk more about where they're at now and how Magic is a part of their daily life, and their changing relationship with Magic, because a lot of people's relationships with Magic changed during, especially during COVID, and that was something that I explored as
Mhm.
well. Like for example, one episode that I was very happy with was, I think it was episode 100, where I did the catching up with Jerry Thompson, and just talking about what Magic means now, and he was very honest about like what Magic means for him now, right now that he's not a so-called pro, he's playing like Marvel Snap all the time, and like where's he at right now? So
Mm-hmm.
I think those conversations are a lot more interesting than like, oh, how did you get into Magic? I think people, it's kind of like saying, it's kind of like asking people in the Magic community, like, when did you learn to ride a bike? Like everybody does it.
Right.
So at some
Right.
point it kind of loses its appeal, because that's just the world we're in. So
Right. Right. It's interesting you say that, because as I was prepping for this interview and as I prep for other interviews, I figure out kind of what I want to talk about, how I want the conversations to go. And like I normally start with, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'm pretty sure I started this interview that way, but I'm like, man, I got to stop doing that. There's got to be like, it's just like, that's such a boilerplate
And Dan took
question.
that personally.
no, but you know what? You know
but
what?
I agree.
I'm
I
not trying to
agree.
trash talk like this method or what I was asked earlier. Like that's not my intent at all. So
Sure.
please don't take what I'm saying by the wrong way.
No.
Like I think
All right,
I
he's
also
off
really
the
strongly
stream. I'm
believe
out of
that
here.
I also strongly believe that to deviate from the norm, you first have to master the norm, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I've been doing this thing where I ask people like this for 4 to 5 years. I assume you guys have not been doing that for 4 to 5 years, because you haven't been doing it that long.
Right.
So it's okay to deviate from the script once you figure out what the base foundation is, right?
Mhm.
And so that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah. Well, no, like again, didn't take it that way at all, because I'm right there with you. Like I kind of agreed, because as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, there was just something in me that was like, that's kind of a boring question. Why? Because again, I'm asking myself why. Why am I asking that? And there are plenty of times where there's actually a good reason why I'm asking that question, right? But I think like for me, like I really have to just sit down instead of just, okay, let's check the boxes. We're gonna ask this. No, because I don't like to operate like that. Excuse me. And I don't think anyone should. I think be intentional with what you want to talk about. Just in anything, be intentional. There should be a reason why behind kind of why you're talking about a certain thing. And like that even applies to that question in particular, right?
And I'll give you a devil's advocate on that. Like
Yeah.
it is actually sometimes good to ask that if you feel that the guests need a little bit of warm up, right? Like
Yeah.
like I've had guests that honestly, I don't want to name any names, but it's like you get a sense that they just want to talk about Magic. So if you want to, you can sometimes be good if you want to feed into that or get them to
Mhm.
be more comfortable. I like to say that the conversation doesn't actually get good until like 40 minutes to an hour into it, because that's when people let their guard down, right? It sounds
Right.
sinister, but
Right.
but like I feel more natural now than I did, like when we first started today.
Right.
Which is
So
why it's
Right.
important to talk before you start recording.
pre-game,
Right, yeah,
super
you're
important.
pre-game.
Pre-game it.
Yeah. Okay. Now I do want to ask, and you touched on this earlier, your bucket list. Who's on your bucket list of people that you really want to talk to for Humans of Magic?
This is kind of a cop out answer, but I do feel like I've talked to almost everybody that I wanted to at least once. So
Okay.
there is no unicorn. My goal now is to have just good conversations with people that can satisfy some of my curiosity about them or things around them. Um, I I'm yeah, so I don't really have like the person, a person that I feel like I absolutely have to talk to, because I also feel like, I mean, there's a name that people have thrown at me, like, can you get Post Malone? Can you talk to Post Malone? Can you talk to like celebrity X or whomever?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if those are necessarily the most interesting conversations, because like when I talk to someone who's relatively more famous, I also have more pressure that I put on myself. Like, for example, when I
Yeah.
recorded with Brian Kibler, I was like super nervous, like the first half hour, because I'm just thinking, like, what can I ask Brian that like people have never asked him before? Like, to
Right.
me, I just don't want to watch another interview where like it's the same stuff, right? This is also
Right.
why I love doing what I do with Humans of Magic, because it's sort of like almost an unfair advantage where it's like people don't get asked this stuff normally, because they're just asked about magic. So that's kind of the challenge is I don't know if there's anybody on my bucket list anymore, and I'm open to having like repeat conversations. I've had a couple of those. I don't know. Like, if you want to throw some names my way, maybe I'll try to see if I can talk to them. But I'm
Have you
always open to
have you
recommendations.
Garfield.
I was gonna say, have you ever talked to Richard Garfield?
I have not. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just had somebody else on a few weeks ago. I Richard Garfield is somebody who's on like our bucket list. I don't know if it'll ever happen. I think he likes to be kind of private, kind of likes to he's more of a private person. But like for us, he's definitely on our list. Like if we could ever have a conversation with them, like that'd be awesome for us. But that's like the one who've like I think since we started, I think Jim, I think he was like we put him right
Yeah,
right on
yeah,
our
he was like
Yeah.
number
list.
one. Yeah.
I have to say, there's been like non-famous people with magic that
Hmm.
I well, I shouldn't say non-famous, people that are not usually so public that I want to talk to. For example, the CEO of Hasbro or the CEO of Wizards, right?
Oh,
Like I have done, like I work in corporate, so it's like I really love having those conversations with Wizards employees about like how the sausage is made in the sausage factory.
Hmm.
I love
I
the
thought they
sort
were a
of like
card game
behind the scenes
company.
stuff, like yeah. But I don't know how much, like, again, I don't know how much mass appeal there is to that. Like I wanted to
Right.
interview the CEO of TCG Player before the acquisition, and
Mhm.
uh but it's also tough because they're not allowed to say certain things. So it's
Right.
like how open of a conversation, or how unguarded of a conversation can you really have?
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. When we talked to Jake Boss at the beginning of the year, Jake was somebody who like we had just wanted to talk to for a while because like again, as a creator, somebody who's been creating content, that was such a fun conversation.
That was
Jim,
wild.
that it was it was
He's great.
100%
He's
wild.
absolutely great.
It was so much fun. But I was I we I said we are so blessed, and I was so stoked to have our year just start off on that note. And like now we're what are we? We just hit March. Yeah, we just hit
Mhm.
March, and like I'm just continuing to look, and just by each of these conversations, it's like you talked about. It's like we're continuing to learn and continuing to grow. But yeah, Jake was such a fun conversation for sure. But I did have one other thing that we kind of want to touch on. I talked earlier about I was going through your book list that you wrote about last year, and there was one book on there. There's a lot of good books on there, right? But one of them that I found, you talked about this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Informal Talks on Zen Meditation and Practice. So you talk. I'm just gonna read what I wrote down here because it's easier. You talk in your post about viewing life through different lenses, being raised Catholic but no longer connected to the community. I've talked about myself being a Christian, and so this particularly piqued my interest a bit. But one thing you say here is content creators build up a portfolio, and that portfolio causes us to develop a confidence about ourselves. Confidence can lead to overinflation of ego. Whether we're recording our 100th podcast, starting our 10th business, or managing our 20th subordinate, it's human nature to believe in linear progression. But what if we can tear it all down and start over? What if we should? So how important do you think it is for content creators particularly to not become rigid with the craft of making things, as you put it?
I think it's super important. And I also think that I still struggle a lot with this. Um, when I talk about those concepts or beginner's mind, the idea that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are a few. I'm just paraphrasing what was in the book. So I think it's really important. The longer we do content or really anything in life, we have to be aware of that and be willing to challenge our sacred assumptions about how things should be done, because that's just the way it is. And how I look at humans of magic is like that's why I've been talking about, like, should I go outside, guess who play magic? Should I do more set reviews? Should I deviate from the script, right? But it's just a huge challenge because um, when you see numbers go up on certain episodes, like the Reed Duke episode, I think uh, that I did with Reed, naturally my lizard brain is like, yeah, I need to do more of that. I need to pump out more that thing which seems to be working in my very small and limited domain. So it's easier said than done. But I do believe in general, getting 1% better, and getting 1% better every day means you have to challenge things that you've done. Um, One of the biggest breakthroughs, or I should say small breakthroughs for me last year, was when my friend said that my YouTube thumbnails looked terrible. And at first I was like very defensive, and I gave you all the reasons that I think I said earlier. It's like, I have limited time and, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Yeah.
But then I kind of looked at it and just be like, yeah, I think I do need to get 1% better. I need to like think about how to, maybe watch some stuff on how to do better thumbnails, like
Hmm.
try to improve my skills in Photoshop, take some courses, read a book. And I think that is just super important, right? Because you just get
Hmm.
stuck in a rut, like when you do things over and over again. I want to ask, like, do you guys have that? Do you guys feel that challenge?
100%, 100%. I'm at a point now where Jim and I actually just had a conversation a couple weeks ago. I do a lot of the editing, and there's a lot that I do, and I have a tendency to, if something needs to be done, I just pick it up and do it. I'm bad at asking for help. I'm bad at saying, "Hey, can you try and do this?" And so for hobbies and happiness, it's hobbies and happiness is me and Jim. It's both of us. And so one thing I'm like, all right, Jim, I want to get you to do a little bit more here. Can you maybe do this, right? But I'm at the point now, like with the podcast, where I'm actually in the middle of editing an episode right now. I have a system set up. I go through it, and then I don't want to get in that, okay, I'm doing this every single time. Because if I do that, I fail. If I do that, we fail. I don't grow as an editor, as a creator, as anything. That's not how I grow. That's not how we grow. That is literally being stuck in a rut. Even if it's a rut that I like the outcome, right? I like how it looks. I like how it sounds. It's still that same rut. So I have to approach everything that I do, every piece of content with, okay, what am I going to do here? Like I have to go beforehand of, all right, I know my process, but what can I do maybe a little bit different, or something that, like the thumbnail, like let's try and design something different. And it's so different, like for me being very analytical. Okay, we talked to Justin Gary a couple of weeks ago. I love that conversation because he's 100% of the mindset of anybody can be creative. And for me, like my day job is I'm an engineer. I'm very analytical. Being creative was like so foreign to me. I'm like, I can't do that. But that's like you can. It's you just have to. I have to bring that mentality to like my analytical side, and then also then apply that to being creative. So it. I think ultimately for me, it just boiled down to I just have to make the choice of, okay, like it's easy to be stuck in that rut and do the same thing over and over. So to answer your question, 100%, I struggle with it all the time. It's just I gotta be present, and I have to make that choice of, all right, I'm gonna do it, because when I make that choice, so many good things come out of it. When I made that choice, I'm so happy with, there's an evolution in design. It's opened my eyes to new ways of, like, the thumbnail, or it's good things always happen. But if I'm just stuck of, no, we're just going to check off the box, that's when bad things, I'll say bad things, but it's just the same thing continues to happen. So
Yeah.
100%.
You guys have good thumbnails, by the way. So you guys are
thank
way
you.
ahead of me on that.
And that's
Yeah.
that's another thing where I'm like, all right, I got to do something different. I got to evolve. I got to get better. We're in the middle. By the time this airs, I don't know if this will be done yet, but we're in the middle of going through a brand redesign. Working with somebody, and it's always great for me working with somebody who does design, like, just to being able to talk to them and then be like, get their ideas, get their inputs. But I'm like, I have to be constantly in that mode of, okay, I have to make sure I'm continually evolving in this space. So yes, struggle with it all the time. James, you're not alone, my friend. You're definitely not alone. So, all right. Well, like, Jim, goodness gracious. This is the first time I did that this episode, James. Jim, this is another one of those conversations where I feel like we could just be here for a long time, but unfortunately we have to move on. But before we do, we talked about that Twitter post that you put. One of my favorite quotes of all time from that: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott. Just remember that, ladies and gentlemen. So, all right. Well, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to one of our favorite segments, and that is Card of the Week. So this week, James was so kind as to choose this week's Card of the Week for us. I'm very interested to hear about the card and the story behind this card. So, James, can you take it away for us and let us know what this week's Card of the Week is?
My card of the week, sponsored by Hobbies and Happiness, is Plague Sliver. Plague Sliver is a card that seems really strange. Like, why did James pick Plague Sliver? But it's really because when my brother and I started playing Magic in the 90s, and we heard about Juzam Jin in Arabian Nights. It was at the time, it was incredible. It was a black 5/5, deals 1 damage to you during your upkeep for 2 black and 2 generic. And at the time, the card was super expensive, so neither of us could afford it. But I remember looking at Juzam Jin in the display case of the LGS and being like, man, looks like a sweet card. The flavor's on point. I'm a black mage, so it's like there's everything about, like, it does 1 damage to you, but I can do 5 damage to the opponent. It's huge. And so that's always been a part of me in the when I first started playing Magic. Fast forward to 2008, coming back to Magic, the first set that I saw being Time Spiral, I was like, wow, there is a functional reprint of Juzam Jin now. It costs 25 cents, and it's called Plague Sliver. I mean, it's strictly worse because if you have 2 Plague Slivers in play, they each do 2 damage to you during your upkeep, because it says all slivers gain do 1 damage to you on your upkeep. Mm-hmm. But it's essentially a functional reprint of Juzam Jin. And so I quickly grabbed a playset of that off eBay for $1. And I was so happy playing Plague Sliver in my casual games until I realized very quickly that it is not the powerhouse that it used to be in the 90s. Hashtag power creep, hashtag Tarmogoyf, hashtag Magic the Gathering. But it's always stuck with me. So Plague Sliver is still my favorite card to this day because it's a reminder of the bridge between the 90s and 2000s Magic for me. And it's black. And it's just a reminder of a simpler time in Magic the Gathering when a 5/5 for 4 mana was actually really good.
My favorite part about this card is, what? If you have Give All Slivers lifelink, this doesn't kill you. You hit yourself for 1 point of damage, heal for a point of damage.
That's right. It's a combo right there.
Yeah.
It's a combo.
Infinite
That's
life.
True. Yeah. Well, it's funny though. When I looked at this card, I'm like, why did he choose Plague Sliver? So then I'm thinking, I'm like, all right, maybe because slivers are just.
I mean, honestly, you're just thinking like James wants to be a huge sliver guy, which is kind of a boring explanation, honestly, right?
Well, no. What I thought was, I wonder if he played in a play group where everybody loved to play slivers, so they had a ton of slivers. Then he dropped this card, and then they killed themselves with it. That's
the most likely explanation. That would have been right if someone else said Plague Sliver for sure. Yeah, I mean, I did love sweep effects. I love damnation and like all those kinds of things in my play group. Like we used to play multiplayer, so yeah, that was definitely a consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so that is this week's card of the week. First sliver on card of the week, which I'm kind of glad it's this sliver and not.
Bet you didn't think that was going to be the first sliver on hobbies and happiness.
Honestly,
I'm sure people would be like, yeah, it should be like the queen sliver or the whatever, like the actual good slivers are.
Honestly,
right?
I was going to say that we didn't get any. That's what I was hoping.
We didn't get any.
But you guys must have been really disappointed when I said like I'm going to talk about Plague Sliver. You guys are just like, we got to get James off the show right now.
I was more of like, okay, I'm sure that there's some combos that you can do to be like, oh, turn all your opponent's stuff also into slivers, or like give them your board and just like kill someone.
Yeah.
Outright.
But I don't know if I said this on the show or if I said this offline, but again, my favorite thing about card of the week is not the card itself, right? But it's really about that connection that our guests or even we have to a card. So it's hearing that story, hearing that connection that each person has to the card. That's why I love doing this. So so the fact that you've got that connection, like even what you said, like it bridged that gap for you, is awesome, and I love hearing that from our guests. So thank you for that, James. All right, so that is this week's card of the week. Thanks again, James, for that. And James, can you again let everybody know where they can find you and your content on the internet?
I can be found at Humans of Magic. Humans of Magic on YouTube. Humans of Magic, it's one word, Humans of Magic on Twitter. Humans of Magic on Instagram, I use that as well. And you can also find where I post all the episodes, all the platforms at humansofmagic.com. That's usually the best place to find me.
Awesome. So again, everybody, be sure you check the links in the description and the show notes. We'll be sure to link all of James and his content for you there. So again, thank you so much, James. A very different conversation, but honestly, this right here is the reason we do tabletop and we do things around a table. It's to develop and nurture these exact connections. So thank you so much for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
I told you we were not ready. Neither of us was ready for that.
Nope.
Jim was not ready. And as Jim is talking in one of those things, I'm like, oh my, this is really hitting Jim. Like it's really hitting him, man.
Yeah.
And like we talked a little bit after that call. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like Jim's just recalling that memory. Yep. And it's like, it's crazy. It really is crazy because, we talk about games, right? And it's not about the games. It's not about the hobby, right? And Jim has said this, I think you said this on even one of the first episodes, right? Mm. It's about the journey, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the journey that we're going on, meeting all these people and having these conversations.
Wow, yeah, it's been 2 years.
Yeah, you've said that multiple times, right? Yeah. And honestly, at the time, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a throw. That's kind of like a cliche, which it kind of is.
It like can be, yeah.
It can be, and it kind of is. But after doing this and again, we haven't really been doing this that long, but we've met a lot of great people. And like that conversation in particular with James was just so great because we made a really good connection and we got to connect over multiple different facets. And it was so great. I mean, James is just a great person to talk to. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation. I know we did. So, all right. Well, before we get out of here, Jim, where can people find you on the internet.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram at Jim Morgan, HNH.
You guys can find me on Instagram at Daniel.G.Campbell, Twitter _DG Campbell. Head over to our website, hobbiesandhappiness.com. You can find links to everything there. So again, head over to that website. It will take you to pretty much anywhere you want to go in the Hobbies and Happiness ecosystem. So, all right. Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation. We're honestly, I don't know how many conversations we're going to have like that.
I don't know how many I can handle. Dan, I don't know how many I can handle before I just break down. Okay.
So, again, hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we will catch you in the next episode. See you, everybody.
Take care.
So